Hi, Bother Brigade. Here's what's bothering me today. A lot of news has been happening, and so unfortunately we're going to have to cover a lot of it because there's both the implementation finally of the Emergencies Act, which is not the War Measures Act, and we're going to get into that, but also Ontario announcing that it is speeding up its return to normal part of phasing out, vaccine passports and mandates and stuff like that, right? So here's the thing, right? Notorious shitheel Pierre Poilievre, and likely next leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, and entirely possibly the next Prime Minister of Canada, said recently that, look, these other countries and experts are getting back to normal. Citation fucking needed, by the way, my guy. But the core of, him and all these other conservatives that are now actually pushing for ending the mandates. That's what we should talk about first, because a lot of people are talking about Denmark in the news recently. Good old socialist, right? Good old progressive Denmark has decided to lift most of its safety measures, and the results have unfortunately been pretty darn predictable. Hospitalizations are way up, although crucially, if you note there in that graph, people in ICUs are actually lower than they were during the second wave. So that's a silver lining here. The problem is still the skyrocketing hospitalization rates, which, those take up beds, which means people can't get their surgeries. And that leads to further health complications. And also, as the daily cases climb, right? Because, okay, look, we're taking our chances. The majority, be it 80% of the population, is vaxxed in some capacity, and that has been shown to reduce transmission, right? So that's what's happening there. They're kind of rolling the dice on this. But as we've seen before, when you do this, it just gives more opportunities for the virus to mutate to create a worse or a more infectious variant. It doesn't make sense in that regard. And so now we're going to actually talk about the lifting of restrictions here in Canada, right? In a better and a more perfect world, Canada would do something along the lines of, okay, you know what? We got to wait till about, 95% of the population is fully vaxxed, right? Because we know we can't get everyone, but that's the really good solid number of okay, that will really help reduce transmission. But in the ramp down of that is okay, so if we're going to drop, mask mandates and vaccine passports, etc., then what also needs to happen is, in order to still ensure that we have a smooth transition, then you still need to give people the ability and opportunity and the security safety net if they need to actually isolate from work to prevent, further transmission. But that's not being done. That's not being done just about anywhere, because at the end of the day, guess what? This is what capitalists want. And so in that sense, right, the whole trucker convoys and blockades going all over the place, right? Yes, they have had an impact on this, but not necessarily the kind of grand impact that I think a lot of them are thinking that they've had. As I've pointed out before on this channel here, most of Canada's provinces are governed by some form of conservative party. And the Conservatives across the board have been very begrudgingly adopting safety measures. And it's part of why Canada's response over the long term has been really abysmal, because it was always trying to be some kind of middle of the road thing of look, come on, we got to let some stuff be open. We can't just give in to socialism. I can't do that in my head and my worldview, right? So that resulted in a lot of, well, maybe this time, the middle of the road will work when, the virus doesn't give a shit about, how tired and frustrated we are by this whole thing. The virus doesn't give a shit about what little restrictions we have. So long as it can spread, the virus is happy. That's how viruses work. And so unfortunately, the result has been a lot of long slogs and, various different boosters and lockdown and lockdown and lockdown. And so people are understandably tired and frustrated, right? In that aspect, the convoy is very much in the right. We are all tired and frustrated of this goddamn bullshit, but it's because of the spectacular failure at both the federal and many provincial levels that has led to this unfortunate situation. And again, most of the premiers here and their conservative governments didn't want to really do any of this stuff. And so the trucker convoys were a convenient out for that of no, you know what? They have a point. So we're going to ramp up reopening, even though it's still rather unsafe to do so. It's not backed up by science. It's not backed up by experts at all. It's only backed up by the interests of the capitalist class that wants to see the economy roaring again because they can't handle the slightest shock to the system because it exists on a razor's edge. And they don't like that. And they don't want that. Even though they've already made, like, if you look at the numbers, they have made a killing over the course of this pandemic, as well as getting literal billions in free money from the federal government in the form of the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, right? So this is just kind of par for the course, unfortunately. And the convoys have been a convenient excuse for conservatives to give the excuse of opening up early while also appealing to their base, which happens to be in the convoys. Oh, look, see, it's all just politics, right? And so the unfortunate reality is that as things start to reopen again, when it's still unsafe to do so, as we're still seeing with Denmark, the chances for a new variant to emerge and spread and infect more people will likely mean, again, a return to, terrible crushed ICU capacities, students being out sick. By the way, we still aren't testing for a lot of this, right? That would also help in terms of the reopening phase of we can still have a decent amount of contact tracing and testing. So, okay, look, you know what? Maybe we don't need the passports and stuff anymore, but, hey, look, this person got sick. Please go, self-isolate for a few days or whatever it is. Like, there's definitely a lot of better ways to be doing this that we are not doing because everything is in service to the altar of capitalism, including the lives of already over 35,000 Canadians. So unfortunately, come springtime or summer, it's going to be a very different story in terms of infections and nurses still probably being absolutely swamped with work. And, already a lot of nurses have quit and the system is very much at its breaking point. And we're doing no favors for the people we, clapped for and banged pots for and said they were real heroes. And, unfortunately, par for the course, this is how we treat our heroes. Just ask all the people who've seen how veterans have been treated in the past, right? So that's the unfortunate and grim timeline for how things go moving forward. So let's talk a little bit about the Emergencies Act because that's also been in the news today. So the Emergencies Act is not the War Measures Act. The Emergencies Act, I think, was created in 1988, and its purpose is in case of a national emergency, but not in terms of putting military on the streets. That's what the National Defense Act is for. So the Emergencies Act has never actually been used in Canada before, and unfortunately really should have been used a lot earlier in the pandemic to actually mobilize a lot more things and get a handle on this earlier. But people at all levels wanted to basically take a wait and see approach to see how much it affected their stock portfolios, and that's why we're all still suffering 2 years later because of this, because the right steps were not taken at the crucial time when they had to be taken, because we've seen various other countries like South Korea, New Zealand, Taiwan, Singapore. We have seen several nations actually take, hell, if you want to even count China to a certain extent, depending how you view how authoritarian lockdowns are, but basically several countries, big and small, and in terms of populations and being islands or mainland nations, Vietnam has also done a really good job. Numerous places have shown that there is a way to get a handle on this. We in the West, for the most part, have chosen not to do so because our politicians are part of the business ruling class, basically. They all have massive stock portfolios and are all part of the same kind of inner cabal of people who went to the same schools and dine at the same fancy restaurants that, the working class work at. That's the problem here, right? They're just two sides of the same coin, and they play people off of each other for usually social issues and weird, silly things, which is why we see a bunch of right-wing grifters these days hammering on about them. But that's how they keep people from being aware of the fact that collectively, they and the system are the problem. So why am I talking about this under the guise of the Emergencies Act? Well, they're already online using the Emergencies Act, they being right-wing people and the far right, are using it to say, look, see, it's about martial law and they're going to come for you and your kids and that's why we need to rise up. And again, I remind people about, the actual goals of the trucker convoy and how they want a coup, basically. So, some accelerationists are probably really happy and oiling up their rifles right now, but the Emergencies Act doesn't allow for, military in the streets. It just gives the government some more powers to enforce some more rules, deploy more resources, and just commandeer more resources. Because, it's hey, in an emergency, you kind of need to be fast about that stuff. But already the wheels are turning to pit Canadian against Canadian to talk about, is the Emergencies Act actually going to just be a cover for Trudeau becoming a dictator? We already think he's a dictator, so that just jives with my worldview. You see the problem here, right? And with the premiers and the federal government being like diametrically opposed, both in terms of politics and also like not wanting to do anything, they're all about, jurisdiction and all that. It's led to this very piecemeal approach, which is part of the problem in terms of the overall pandemic response. And so the use of the Emergencies Act, whether it's for the blockades or for like implementing COVID-19 measures, etc., it is a fundamental recipe for disaster right now because it's too little, too goddamn late. And that's the problem here. And unfortunately, already the wheels are turning in terms of the media spheres to say basically like, oh, you know what? We still got to have Canadian against Canadian about, is the Emergencies Act good or bad? And already I'm kind of playing into that by making this video, right? Trying to tell people it's not the National Defense Act. Already someone's going to say, oh, stop shilling for big government, even though longtime viewers here know my utter like contempt for Trudeau and the Liberal Party at this point. But that's just kind of how media works these days, isn't it, right? One side good and noble, the other side totally bad. There's no possible medium here or like gray area. We aren't possibly distracting from, other things. That's why the media still hasn't referred to, or been talking about some of the glaring problems with the racist and like separatist organizers behind these convoys. Maybe, that should be talked about more often than trying to do a both sides of and just drum up the whole, we're all exhausted. Oh, wait, right. There it is, because the media is also, for the most part, owned by the capitalist class, which has an interest in reopening early and pitting people in the working class, etc., against each other so that we don't recognize this pattern of behavior and how it's all still just going to lead to more suffering and difficulty in the months to come. And it instead pits us against each other when we should be recognizing media is problematic for a bunch of like different and valid reasons, as well as being in the pocket of capital. They are just another arm of the capitalist class. And whether it's Team Red or Team Blue, they are the capitalist class as well. That doesn't make money in an online sphere driven by, the algorithm, the almighty algorithm and data. That's going to be the key to everything. That's how we finally get to unlock the secrets of the universe, is through data and algorithms. And it is just so unfortunate because, as I'm pointing out, how all this is clicking together to lead not just to the current situation, but what the situation looks like a few months from now. The problem is that, sure, I can point this out and be correct about it, but no one's really going to suddenly take that and turn that into a revolution or a cohesive movement to, turn on the actual people we should be turning on. Because, we're all frustrated by this. We're tired of the pandemic. We're tired of everything that's happened these past 2 years. But the virus doesn't give a shit how tired we are. And we've already lost over 35,000 Canadians to this. 35,000 fewer Canadians who can't sit here like the rest of us and bitch about the state of the world and this dystopia we are living in that is the result of 40 plus years of neoliberal nightmare fuel since the days of like Reagan and Thatcher and Mulroney. We are all tired and frustrated with each other, with our leaders, with people in the convoy, with counter-protesters. We are all so goddamn done, right? But the unfortunate reality is that unless we actually begin targeting the actual structures that have allowed this to happen and to continue to foment the divisions among us, while also just worsening the problem and pushing for reopening earlier, despite us being just like, yeah, come on, like we're done. I just want to, see friends again, go to shows and concerts. Yeah, I get it, right? I miss beer night with the boys too, right? So this is the problem where we're all so fundamentally done, but by ending things early and not having support systems in place to manage it as it continues to go down and give crucial support to frontline workers, be they healthcare workers, teachers, grocery store clerks, etc. Instead, all we're looking at is a recipe for more variants, which is the last thing we want, because the last thing we want to do is have to mask up again and get more booster shots or vaccines and lockdowns, right? Like, no one, like next to no one is saying more lockdowns. Yeah. Like, no one is really like this. It's absurd to suggest that, but unfortunately, that is what the future looks like if we don't get this right. And we've already seen over the past 2 years, we haven't got it right in a variety of ways for all the aforementioned reasons I listed. And so unfortunately, we're going to be even more tired and frustrated in the future when another variant of concern emerges and we're thinking, how the hell did this happen? And I'm going to link people this video because once again, we've done the same thing time after time again, expecting a different result. They call that insanity, and yet we call it normal and politics. And it absolutely doesn't need to be happening, and it shouldn't be happening. But unfortunately, it's going to. And we're still going to be like, how did this happen? And it's just so deeply infuriating and unfortunate. And it all brings me back to something that I said a long time ago in a video months, if not like a year ago at this point. And so with that, unfortunately, I guess this is maybe a bit of a revelation, whether people clued into it or not. That was actually the point where I gave up on having any kind of real hope for how this pandemic would end, because I saw what the actual decision of the world had been. And so unfortunately, I leave you with those words that I said however many moons ago. And so we're going to continue to see spread and health warnings, and it's going to become like the new flu vaccine of, oh, we got to kind of roll the dice on which variants are going to be more popular this year, which are going to be more effective, which vaccine is going to work most. It's the roll of the dice. We're gambling with literal global health now for years, all because we refused to let people lose profits and change our ways for a moment, a cosmic moment in time. We refused to do so because money was more important and protecting copyright was more important than the health of the entire planet. The sum totality of humanity was weighed against an artificial construct of money, and humanity lost. And that's what's bothering me today.